Morning. It's time for a movie review. Another movie from 1961. I'm going to review today Judgement at Nuremberg, an American epic courtroom drama that was directed and produced by Stanley Kramer and written by Abby Mann. The movie set in Nuremberg, Germany in 1948. The film depicts a fictionalized version of the judge's trial of 1947, one of the 12 US Nuremberg military tribunals conducted before the US military. The film centers on a military tribunal led by Chief Trial Judge Dan Haywood, played by Spencer Tracy. And before him, we see 4 German judges and prosecutors, as compared to the 16 defendants in the actual trial. And they stand accused of crimes against humanity for their involvement in atrocities committed under the Nazi regime. The film deals with the Holocaust and non-combatant war crimes against the civilian population, the post-World War II situation, and the geopolitical complexity of the actual Nuremberg trials. Let's look briefly at the cast. In the lead roles are Spencer Tracy, who plays Chief Judge Dan Haywood. Of course, there will be a slide confirming this. Burt Lancaster is a defendant, Dr. Ernest Yanning. Richard Widmark plays the prosecutor, Colonel Tad Lawson. He's an army official, of course. Maximilian Schell plays the defense counsel, Hans Rolf. Marlene Dietrich is Frau Berthal, and her husband was executed by the Allies. Montgomery Clift plays Rudolf Pettersson. He's a witness, as is Judy Garland, who plays Irene Hoffman. William Shatner is Captain Harris Byers. And then there are a number of other ones I'll refer to. John Wengraf is the Justice Dr. Karl Wieck, who's the former Minister of Justice in the Weimar Republic of Germany. As I say, there'll be a full slide for you to peruse at your leisure. One could expect and anticipate in the awards area, this was a hugely successful movie. At the Academy Awards, it won it was nominated for Best Motion Picture, also for Director. For Best Actor, Maximilian Schell won the award, and Spencer Tracy was nominated. In the Supporting Actor category, a nomination for Montgomery Clift. With the Supporting Actress, Judy Garland was nominated, and further nominations for Best Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, and Best Nominations. The BAFTA nominated for Best Film, Best Foreign Actor, and for Clift and Schell. Best Motion Picture, Schell won Best Actor in a Motion Picture Drama at the Globes, and at the Globes Clift was nominated, as was Garland, and Kramer won the Best Director award. That completes my look at the awards. Right, now let's move on to the movie. This was my favourite movie of 1961, and I've seen it now on 3 occasions, and it still continues to move me considerably. I think it helps if you are into history and you are a persuasion that enjoys courtroom dramas, and also you're concerned about what took place in Germany in the late 30s and early 40s, an aspect of history that I believe should never be forgotten to all the populations of the world, including future populations. This movie does justice to all of what the direction by Kramer is looking for, and it was probably the peak of his career, and the performances of the actors are outstanding and all worthy of their awards at the Oscars, at the Golden Globes, and at the BAFTAs. The quality of performance is very symptomatic of how powerful this war drama is, and it's predominantly set in the courtroom. The mechanisms of courtrooms and it's an international court, of course. So what did I see? How did it affect me? There are some plot spoilers in this review, but I would stress that this should really have absolutely no bearing on your decision to go ahead to watch this movie. You'll be moved by it for certainly. It starts with a 5-minute musical overture of the Marches, a military music piece, which creates an atmosphere of how German people were receiving the arrival of the National Socialist Party, the party led by Adolf Hitler in the late 30s. It therefore opens a door to National Socialism, and the propaganda and indoctrination is very much covered through the music that's offered. It's Kramer's door opening us to this extraordinary movie and its extraordinary period in human history. Just before the characters arrive on set, we are left with a view of the famous Reichstag building with the Nazi swastika on top of its roof. And as we collide with the music, and eventually as the music subsides, the Nazi swastika is symbolically blown up and descends onto the streets of Nuremberg. We then meet Chief Judge Dan Haywood, played by Tracy, as he arrives in Nuremberg. We see the ruined city as he drives through, and it has an instant impact of the constant bombardment by the Allies at the end of the war, and that real rebuilding has yet to take place. Bearing in mind, it's 1948. The carnage certainly had an impact on how the judge moves forward, being responsible to handle this war trial. And it also brings to your attention immediately that Tracy's performance in this role has been well researched, as he, amidst all this grotesque imagery, is extremely cordial to the local German people. And I think this sets up the movie. Its even-handedness and level-mindedness. Tracy is exercising his duty in that way, although he's clearly uncomfortable with the services that are being offered to him to ease this arduous task and to make him very comfortable in this environment. He's very pragmatic about his role in having to judge over the so-called underlings and on trial, and knowing that the real fish, the hierarchy of the Nazi party, have either escaped justice by suicide or have fled. So to the 4 judges who are on trial. They represent the underlings as such as this process begins. And we start with the pleas. Lancaster, who plays Ernst Janning, remains silent, and his counsel, Schell, who plays Rolf, puts in a plea on his behalf. Janning, we hear, doesn't recognise the court or the proceedings. The other 3 plead not guilty. The movie is very much a movie of speeches, with Widmark, the prosecutor, beginning his impatient appeal to those present to recognise that all the 4 accused were educated men, were carrying out their duties as judges well before the rise of the Nazi party and well before they took over in government, and therefore could not have been hoodwinked, brainwashed or manipulated with regard to the justice that took place under the Nazi regime. He makes this point that they should take full responsibility for what took place from 1935 onwards through to the end of the war in 1945, and that there is absolutely no opportunity for them to suggest that they were unaware of what is happening within Germany and the neighbouring countries with regard to the mass extermination of ethnic minorities, particularly the Jewish population. And the initial stages of the movie, we see the use of headphones as translations tools, although there's only sparingly German at the beginning of the trial, and then it's largely in English. The German's delivered mainly by Rolf, and the performance of Schell is absolutely exceptional. He won the Best Actor Oscar, and his delivery is very challenging, very aggressive, very nationalistic, as he puts together his opening statement. And as he sees it, the 4 men are guilty of interpreting the law that was on the statue. They carried out their job, his point is made. They had no linking to the atrocities. And he references the history lesson about justice departments becoming the arm of the state. A series of witnesses then take us through the movie. And the first is a very significant one. It's Dr. Karl Weick, former Minister of Justice in the Weimar Republic of Germany. He's a prosecution witness, and he described what took place before and after within the Justice Department prior to the Nazis winning the election in 1935. He describes how the Justice Department changed in its operations and the fact that all the members accused were working prior to 1935 and that their job was linked to interpreting the law unbiasedly and to the best of their abilities, but that their role changed. They had to wear robes with insignias on them that promoted the National Socialist Party. Also, detail regarding a particular law that was used is to illustrate the before and after was the introduction of an interpretation of the sterilisation law. And although this had been law before, it then became very functional for political purposes. Prior to that, it was hardly used. Those whose intellect wasn't sufficient and weren't pure-blood Germans were in line for compulsory sterilisation. Rolf cross-examined him, and his intimidation style and confrontational methods brought out his aggressiveness, and his tortuous delivery illustrated how brilliant this acting and performance was. He ridiculed the testimony to the point where the operations of the law wasn't significantly changed under Nazi law. Next, the testimony of Peterson, played by Clift, gave the core information about how he personally became a victim of this compulsory sterilisation policy, and we witnessed a pathetic, sad, timid display by a man who was not intellectually strong but was full of sadness, full of emotion with regard to the procedures that led to the sterilisation. He was classified as a person of feeble mind, and the cross-examination by Schell shook both myself and all members within the courtroom. A piece of cinema excellence. Patterson, played by Clift, is a character that you'll never forget after witnessing the detail. We then move on to the next witness, the testimony of Irene Hoffman, beautifully played by Judy Garland. However, just prior to this, it's worth noting the performance of Marlene and Dietrich, who tried to befriend Tracy outside the courthouse. And initially their relationship was cordial, as she tried to impress upon him her husband's innocence. And the small table sort of cordiality was replaced with an intensity when looking at the German husband's innocence against the backdrop of the atrocities. She tried to get Tracy to acknowledge a possibility that her husband had been unfairly executed. However, let's get back to the evidence of Hoffman. The prosecution counsel, again brilliantly played by Widmark, had earmarked this woman as a strong witness. But he had to go to Berlin and coax her to appear because she and her husband were very reluctant to put herself on the centre stage, fearful of retribution, as she saw it going against the will of the German people, and she would be seen as a traitor. In her testimony, she was asked to describe her role in another case that caused a lot of a fracas previously. This involved a Jewish elderly man, and the implication was that they may have had some sexual relationship, which was in the atmosphere of ethnic minority cleansing viewed very negatively. This sexual relationship, of course, was also based on the fact that the woman was a mere 16 years old. This famous case, however, led to the friend being convicted and executed, and he, of course, was a Jew. The case was notorious at the time, and it was reenacted to some extent by her appearance at this trial, when she vividly recounted her friendship with this man after her parents had passed away, and how then the prosecuting counsel won. Emil Hahn, who was the prosecutor, was now in the dock, and had manipulated the evidence and basically told a series of lies to get a conviction. However, Rolf, defending his client, tried desperately to get her to confess to something more than just a friendship. But he failed, and it provoked an outburst from Janning in the defence of Hoffman. And it was at that point that Janning took it upon himself to deliver his speech. His speech was about how he viewed the so-called four men on the stand. All the accused, he stated, were responsible for what was going on at the camps at the time of the atrocities. And they couldn't hide no longer behind the notion that they had no knowledge. The speech by Lancaster is chilling, so riveting, and I've always been a fan of this actor. But this particular role contrasts vividly with what his usual characters were on film. A very powerful scene, this. The prosecuting counsel then offered to the court film footage that was taken by the Americans as they liberated the concentration camps of Rutenburg and Belsen. Very harrowing it was too to witness them again as the bulldozers are seen at Belsen removing the stench carcasses as the Germans fled these camps in the last day of the war. Schell tried to use a comparison with the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the Americans and tried to assert a similar sort of a perspective to the horrors of murdering 10 million Jews. We then, back to Lanning's speech, we hear about the fear, the pride and the devils amongst us, meaning Hitler, and the perception that Germany was in a crisis in the late 30s and that better times were ahead, promised of course by Hitler, but there was a need to get rid of those minorities. Those minorities would only be a phase, a way to transform Germany to a better way of life. Schell outlined the intentions of the German in the 30s, and he basically said that it was really based on their love of country. And Schell then referred to other political monsters of the era, reference to Churchill and his political history with regard to earlier in his army career. He also refers to the Americans who knew exactly what was happening in Germany in the early 40s. And he makes the point that they should be construed as guilty as the four charged in the dock on that day. Same history with regard to the Soviet Union. I also heard a further point by a senior member of the American Armed Forces advising Hayward to consider very carefully how he's going to come to a verdict. This was based on the fact that the Americans basically needed the support of the German people because of the imminent threat of the rise of the Soviet Union through the Eastern Bloc. The blockade of Berlin was taking place at this particular time, and it suggested that Hayward should lean on the side of clemency for these four men. The final part of the movie, we get the summations. Widmark's is simple, very short, and implies that he may well have been told to tone it down. Tracy has none of it, and his final statement on the fate of the four accused focuses on personal responsibility, justice, truth, and the value of a single human life. And there's a closing phase where Hayward is asked by Janning to go to the cell. Janning wants to talk justice. This movie is a record of history, an accurate record of history, and a movie that I feel needs to be shown to all generations, current or future. It's a solid reminder as to what happened in Europe in those bitter 15 years, and I can't recommend it more highly. Get to see it. Judgement in Nuremberg, released in 1961.